All right, in this video, we are going to talk about minimalism. We're going to talk a little bit about decluttering, and we're going to talk about some of the life change that comes. And I'm chatting with a good friend of mine, Joshua Becker, who is one of the leading voices on minimalism. He's a best-selling author, and he's got a great new book that he just released that I definitely recommend you check out. And this was a great conversation. So if you're new to minimalism, or if you're just kind of curious about this whole thing, I think you're going to enjoy this. So with that out of the way, hang tight. We're just about to start. All right, hey everybody, I have Joshua Becker here, and he is a best-selling author. He's a real good friend of mine, a former pastor, and a guy who's just challenged my thinking a whole lot over the years. And I love friends like that who just always have unique perspectives on things and just have really good ways of looking at things. And so we're going to be chatting today about minimalism, decluttering, and how this applies to your house, and a lot of different things along those lines. So tell me a little bit about what the new book is, and then we'll dive into some other questions.
Sure. I wrote a book 2.5 years ago called The More of Less, Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Own, which I wrote to convince people to own less stuff, making the case that all the things that they own are not making them happy, but even worse, most of the things we own are actually distracting us from happiness, or at least fulfillment and purpose. So I wrote the book. I loved it. It did very well. The book didn't do a very good job, just because I didn't have the time, and it wasn't supposed to be that type of book, of going specifically how do you implement this in your life, in your home. And so it's probably the biggest complaint that I got about the book. I love it, but where are the practical steps to implement these things? And I always said, well, it wasn't supposed to be that book. How about I write that book? How about I write that book next? Publisher came to me with the idea, and I said, yes, absolutely. Let's do it. I've been living it for 10 years. I have an online course that's helped 25,000 people do this. And so I know the questions that are asked. I know the obstacles and hurdles that pop up. And I think I found a pretty good method that works. So the Minimalist Home, the subtitle is a room-by-room guide to a decluttered, refocused life, which is exactly what the book is.
So, well, let me ask you this. Because I am a follower of you. I mean, you were the one who kind of kickstarted me on this idea of minimalism, and it was foreign to me, just like probably most people. And I was just kind of afraid of what I thought minimalism was, and honestly, how some people treat minimalism. This crazy, maybe it's not crazy, but this out there idea of you should have one fork and one knife, and and maybe nothing on any of your walls, and probably get rid of your couch too. You should just sit on the floor. Like, that was the thing that just kind of terrified me. And like I said before, I think you bring like a more balanced approach to it, a more realistic approach. And so I'm assuming you're kind of talking about that as you're going through the book, right?
Yeah. The book is very much in line with everything I've ever said or believed to be true about minimalism. Namely, the goal of minimalism isn't to own the fewest amount of things as possible. Like, that's not, I suppose that might be the goal of some people, but I don't think that's the purpose of minimalism. Minimalism is about owning less, or owning just the right amount of things in order to best fulfill our purpose in life. And so whatever that might be, my wife and I, we went down to one car for a couple months, and found out that it didn't work for us. We were just too far out away from public transportation, and she was going that direction, and I was going this direction. And we're like, well, I think we need two cars in order for us to do what we think we're supposed to do with the one life that we have, and bring the most good into the world. So, when I first started writing about minimalism, I think most people who use the word were using it on this pretty extreme level. I think there's an article about a guy who owned just 10 things and trying to own less than 100 things. And that was kind of the use of the term back then. I just I use the word because that's what I was introduced to. I wanted to own fewer things. I wanted to own the minimum amount of things, but very kind of purpose-based, rational approach to owning less is how I've
Yeah.
always treated it. And I think the word's kind of evolved over the last 10 years because of
Yeah.
that. So yes, the book is very much about optimizing. I always think optimizing is probably the perfect word for what I'm talking about. I want to own the right amount of possessions. I don't want to be a burden in too few or in too many. The reality is that most of us have too many possessions and it has become a
Yeah.
burden. So minimizing is usually the right step for most people.
All right. So, is minimalism the same as decluttering?
I use the words pretty interchangeably. I think that the decluttering um, has less negative connotation, maybe. Like people want to declutter, but they may not want to minimize. So there's a part where I think I use them interchangeably, but I think they're different. If I were to describe the difference, I would say decluttering is about getting rid of clutter, right? I guess that's the definition of it. Decluttering is about removing clutter.
Yeah.
Minimizing, I think, um, includes challenging some assumptions about how much we need. So
Yeah.
most
I like
people want to declutter, but I think if you take the next step of, and I really want to challenge my assumptions about how much I need, and will owning even less than I think I need improve my life? I think that's when minimizing starts becoming probably the more appropriate word, as opposed to just getting rid of the clutter that nobody wants anyway.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's, I guess, kind of step back and address, since the book is so practical and you have some of the stuff in there, let's talk about, for somebody watching this who's just maybe intrigued by this idea, but feels overwhelmed. I mean, what is one quick win? What is one simple thing that anybody can take away, or most people can take away and just kind of implement today?
Yeah. Uh, um, get rid of everything in your car that you don't need. The book is follows what I call the Becker method, but it moves people easiest to hardest through their home.
Yeah.
I think people hear decluttering or minimizing, and they're like, "Yeah, I got to go through my garage. I got to go through my basement. I got to go through my attic, or that storage unit I need to go." And I think when that becomes the first step, it does become very overwhelming. We don't get to see the progress. So I encourage people to start simple. Start in the easiest, most lived-in space that you have in your home, because it does two things. You get a sense of victory, right? Like you can minimize your car, at least the things in your car, probably in 15 minutes just
Yeah.
by grabbing a bag and throwing everything in there that you don't need to have in your car. So you can accomplish it, and you can notice right away the positive effect of this change on your life. So when you get rid of the empty water bottles or children's toys or ketchup packets or CDs or sunglasses and coins and receipt,
Big
like
Mac
when
laying
you
under the
take
seat.
yes, when you take all of that out of your car and then you get in it, it feels nice, like it's
Yeah.
calm and it's peaceful, and like, yeah, where else can I try this in my home? And so
Yeah.
I say, try the living room. That's where the book starts, in the living room, which for a lot of people is an easy place to get a victory. And then you get to sit down on your couch and, wow, this feel like the room feels open. There's less distraction all around me. I can focus on the people in the room as opposed to all the stuff that needs to be moved around. I think that's when we start seeing those benefits. We're motivated to take the next step.
Yeah, so that's really good because I mean I can attest because when we first started this process, that was the same way. It's like it fuels your fire once you get something done. And I don't remember what room I started with. I might have even started with my closet, which probably isn't the best idea for some people, but just getting that victory and, like you're saying, like feeling that refreshing openness in just one area, it's addicting. It makes you want to do it in others. And so, yeah, I completely agree. That makes a lot of sense.
Someone recently said it's like the Dave Ramsey debt snowball, except for
Mhm.
decluttering. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it is, right? You gain victories. It's the debt snowball without the competing interest rates that you have
Yeah.
to
Exactly.
decide which one to pay off first. Just pick the easiest lived-in room and then pick the next one. And then you get to, like, when I speak, though, like, a lot of questions. Well, what do I do with my books or my sentimental things or my arts and crafts or my camping gear? Like, there are certain items for some people that I don't know how I'm ever going to do that because I'm very attached to these types of things.
Yeah.
And again, like, do those last. Don't start with the hardest stuff. Gain victory in some easy places. And then when you get to that harder stuff, I think you're in a better mental space, able to handle it.
Yeah. Completely true. All right. So I wanted to ask you, because it does seem like there's, and I think this comes back to philosophy here on minimalism as a whole, but uh, it seems like there's differing opinions and views of what minimalism looks like and what it should be. And so in terms of that, like, is there any advice that you feel like you hear regularly um, from maybe the minimalist crowd or something along these lines that you just think probably should be avoided?
There's one that comes to mind that I bothers me a little bit every time I hear someone using it in the conversation of minimalism and trying to apply it there. It bugs me a little bit, but I talk about in the book, before I get to that one sentence that I hate, that I hear a lot of minimalists say, especially like around the time of when I'm writing a book or when anyone's writing a book about minimalism, and they'll say, why do you need a book? Just throw everything away. And it bothers me a little bit. And I even address it in the book because there are a percentage of people that I think can just hear the word minimalism and start throwing everything away.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small percentage. Like, for most people, like, this is a emotional process and it involves time and a strategy to do it.
Yeah.
Is pretty helpful. But probably the piece of advice that I hear the most, a little bit unrelated to the book, because I don't necessarily get into that topic in the book, is when people try to apply minimalism to relationships, and they'll say something like, if a relationship isn't serving you, then you should get rid of it.
Gotcha.
And I don't, like, there is a time and a space for setting boundaries, and there's a time and a space for removing people from your life. I get that, um, but I don't think people should be treated the same way as physical possessions
Yeah.
are. And I can say, for physical possessions, if an item isn't serving me, if an item isn't bringing value to my life, then I should get rid of that physical object. But I don't think I should say that about people. If every relationship in my life has to serve me and feed into me, I think that's a pretty selfish
Yeah.
way to live. I think there's a lot to be said for selfless living and having relationships in our lives that don't serve us, but we're just doing the serving. So again, I get where they're coming from when they say it, but this whole idea of I'm cutting out anybody from my life that doesn't benefit me, I think, is probably not
Well, yeah, and
probably.
that
I think
doesn't
it's
really align
an
with the
awful
Christian.
way to live.
Yeah, it just doesn't really align with the Christian worldview of, we are called to be servants. And I think there are a lot of relationships that God will lead or will cross paths with where we're not necessarily getting the benefit, but, or at this moment, but God is using us in their lives to help them. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that just makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, but I hear it a lot. I hear from a lot of people, and it's a shame. But
All right. Well, turning just a little bit here. So I consider myself a minimalist who's been at this, I don't know, 3 or 4 years or something. And like a lot of things, like a lot of good habits, I've ebbed and flowed and have times where I'm more gung-ho, times when I do better, and then other times where I drift and things get a little bit cluttery or end up just having too much stuff laying around, and then it starts to wear on me, and then And I'm just wondering, like, do you ever struggle or do you ever drift? And if you do, like, how do you handle that? Like, how do you resolve that?
I would describe my experience as very similar to yours. That my home typically goes the same way. So it's me and my wife, and then I have two kids. They're 16 and 12. And I don't know if it's true or not. I get the feeling that if it was just me in the home, that maybe that wouldn't be the case. But I don't know. Maybe it would
Yeah.
be if it was just me. But I mean, just the reality is, kids are changing and growing, and they're getting different things. And so, like, and just for people in a home, like, things continue to come in through the door. I know there's some people who say that they are very good at, like, one in, one out, and whenever one
Mhm.
thing enters the home, they take one thing out of the home. And I always think maybe that looks good on paper. I don't know if they actually live that way, or they just say that
Yeah.
they do. Maybe some people are disciplined enough to do it, but I've never been. And so literally it tends to feel the same way that you do. Like, I get the home to a spot where it's good. Um, and but things collect, and things come into the home. We're recording this around the holidays, and so, like, just holiday action and people giving us stuff and things enter in. And but like early to mid January, I'll just go back through the house again, and I'll kind of have that feel like, we've got too much stuff in here. Let's
Yeah.
go back through this space or this area. Now, probably where I differ a little bit from um, the habit that a lot of people have of, they declutter and then they fill everything back up again, they declutter again, and, like, they don't ever get any victory in it, is, like, I do stay on top of it better than most. I even put in the book, there's a minimalism maintenance guide. In there's a section like, here's some weekly habits to embrace, here's some seasonal habits to embrace, here's some yearly things to check off your list that keep your home, um, serving its purpose, as opposed to becoming filled with clutter. So there are some things I do that I think keep it from becoming too out of control. But generally speaking, I follow the same model that
Yeah.
you do. Starts to feel full, let's get rid of stuff again, and slowly but surely.
Yeah.
But not like every 3 months. I'm like, it's been 10 years. There's maybe one other time where I felt like, over 10 years, where I'm like, let's go through each of these rooms again, and let's see what we can get rid of. Kind of feel like that's a step I need to take again soon.
Gotcha. All right. So along those lines, one of the questions I was going to ask is, like, what do you find causes people to fail, um, or to not succeed at, like, creating a minimalist home, and is that the thing? Is it just the lack of maintenance, or, I mean, what would you say?
Well, both before and after. So before the maintenance, you have just the process of going through your home room by room, and getting rid of things that you don't need. Probably two things come to mind that stop people there. Number one, it's difficult. Like, it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes energy, it takes focus. It is very. I think people stop when it becomes emotionally difficult, right? It's easy to get rid of the towels that you don't use and the spatulas that you don't use, but then you
Exactly.
start getting into some things, and you're like, this is hard for me to get rid of. I'm really
Yeah.
struggling here. And they just stop, and they don't want to cross that bridge, because that bridge involves, like, really digging into your heart, and
Yeah.
asking the question, like, why is this hard for me to get rid of? Are there healthy reasons that I'm holding on to this, or are these unhealthy reasons that this is so difficult for me to get rid of? And that's a pretty difficult process for anyone. But I mean, I think that's when the the good stuff happens. Like that's when, the real life change happens, is when we start
Yeah.
delving into some of those issues. So I think that issue, just the difficulty of it, both externally and internally, holds people up. I think the kind of what we were talking about, the difference between decluttering and minimizing. I think people stop when they start feeling challenged in their notion of how much they need to own. I write in the book and in the More of Less a lot about experimenting with less and testing out owning fewer things in some areas to find the optimal amount. A lot of people don't want to take that next step, even though they have, I think, nothing to lose in doing it. So
Yeah.
those are the things in the process of becoming minimalist, and then in the maintenance afterwards, that next step. It's a different journey to overcome consumerism than it is to declutter. There are
Yeah.
shelves and shelves of books on how to declutter. There are very few books on, how do I overcome society's expectations about consumerism, and
Yeah.
how do I not just how do I own less, but how do I want to own less? I think
Yeah.
is a different journey and requires some different thinking and different observations in order to get there. But possible.
Yeah.
I just think it. I mean, it's great. I think that's when the real benefits of minimalism come in, is when we overcome the desire to buy stuff and to fill the space back up again. But it's different. I think it requires a different mindset, different thinking.
Yeah. And I think I think that's one of the things I enjoyed so much about just kind of going on this journey, is kind of discovering that for myself a little bit. And just the joy of, and this is something that I kind of thought this was insane. I kind of thought this was just one of those, oh yeah, you're just saying that. But like the actual joy of having less stuff and the freedom, the removing the burden off of your shoulders by getting rid of certain things, like it doesn't make sense, but it's real. You know what I mean? And I think that's I think that can make it really attractive to fight against consumerism. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I have this conversation, that's always the first thing that I say. The first step to overcoming the desire to want more and buying more and more stuff is to notice how your life has improved by owning less, and wanting that to be true. I did one of my first newspaper interviews just a couple years into minimalism. The last question was, do you think this is just a phase you're going through, or are you going to be this for the rest of your life? And it was the easiest question of the whole interview to answer. I'm like, I'm not going back. Like I love freeing up money and time, and
Yeah.
just the things that I'm pursuing with my life, other than material possessions. I'm never going back to the way life was before. But that's always the first step, I think, is noticing those benefits.
All right. So Minimalist Home is coming out December 18th, 2018. Where can people find this?
Yes, everywhere.
Everywhere books are sold, right?
People can find it everywhere, and in every format: hardcover, ebook, audiobook. I narrate it myself.
Awesome.
Yes, it's should be available in most every bookstore. Christian bookstores. It's a Christian publisher, so the book
Great.
isn't explicitly Christian, but should be in Christian bookstores as well as all the Barnes and Nobles. And you can
Great.
order online from Walmart if you want. So every store is selling the book about buying less stuff. So
The irony, I love it. All right, man. Well, it was good chatting with you as always. And we'll have to do it again soon.
thanks so much, man.
All right, I hope you found that helpful. And if you did, I would love it if you could leave us a thumbs up down below. And if you're new to our channel, what we do here is we talk about timeless biblical principles and how to manage your money. And then we also talk about a lot of the practical ways to kind of put more money in your pocket. So if that resonates with you, definitely hit that subscribe button so you can hear from us as we create more content along those lines. Now, in this next video, I'm going to walk you through a process that I went through to declutter my house. Basically, I was inspired by Joshua and I ran with this. And I ended up making over $2,000 in 1 month using this process. So that's what we cover in this next video here. So if that sounds good to you, just click on over to the next video and I'll see you there.